Hello, I'm Kathryn Dalziel and I'm painting an American miniature horse today in oil on canvas. I'm using colours French ultramarine, burnt umber, raw umber, red ochre, raw sienna, yellow ochre and transparent white. So let's get going. I start off on a bare canvas and I just do an outline, and I use turpentine with a bit of paint. I think I'm using raw umber and it's very watered down with a bit of turps. The ease of this is that when you use turpentine like this, you can blank it out with just plain turpentine on another brush and move your lines if they're not quite right. So nothing's written in stone at this stage. You can literally move the paint around the canvas and get rid of it. I take extra care in getting the outline right because it makes it easier later. So if you need to rub out, with using a brush with just turps on, you can at this stage very easily before you get any real dark colours on. Now after I've got my outline, I go straight away to putting in the darks. That's the first thing I do, and I put the darks in where the shadow pattern is. Sometimes I measure up as I'm going along, so I measure how many times the nose goes into the length of the nose, and I use my paintbrush for doing this, which I will show you in a later video. So here go the darks. And I sort of quickly blank in the colour. She's actually a silver bay, but she goes a chestnut colour if she's not clipped. So there's your darks going in as well. Got a bit of shadow on her face. At this stage, you don't have to be too precious. Just put the paint on and give yourself markers really by the shadows and the lights. This pony is, well actually she's a horse, I should call her a horse, even though she's very tiny, is a little bit like a Jersey cow. She's cream round her nose and she's got wonderful dark eyes. I think she's very pretty, but I might be a bit biased because she's such a sweet little thing. She stands at about 34 inches high, so quite manageable, but she's got features like a horse. She's quite fine legs and fine little face. I'm always careful where I place the ears, sort of make sure that you've got them in the right place, so I sort of measure up against their eyes and what have you. You've got a dear little mouth and nose, very dinky. And quite a dark muzzle, little black nose. And she's dark round her eyes, and then she has cream above that. So very much like a Jersey cow colouring. Interestingly, when she's completely clipped out, she's really silver. She goes more of a brown colour when she grows her coat. American miniatures grow very thick coats, so they keep them clipped quite often because they get very big, long, hairy beards in the winter. Excuse me. So that's 2 brushes. I usually work with more than 1 or 2 brushes in my hands. And I keep my colours separate, so I keep dark brushes for dark colours and light brushes for light colours, so I don't, as I want to keep a fresh looking painting, so I don't get mixed mud. Whenever I'm painting, I tend to do a bit of painting and then stand back from the canvas so I can see from afar what it looks like and if I've got the proportions right. So I move away from the canvas quite a lot. If you're right up onto the canvas and doing it close up, you really do get a distorted view of what you're painting, and you just get tied up in the detail instead of getting the right proportions. And I trained as a classical portrait painter, and that's very exacting. I actually didn't train in this country. Although I did do a training here at first, I trained in Florence. And I do use a lot of the methods of the old masters. In oil painting, we train to put layers on, gradually build the paint up, not to put it on in great sort of thick chunks, which can be done, but it's just a different technique. I have changed over to using medium now, and you can use any medium on the market. I sometimes use one that's not very smelly. I sometimes mix my own, and when I mix my own I use about 2/3 turpentine, and then I use 1/3 of linseed oil. I give it a good shake up. You can add a little bit of varnish as well. I sometimes use a little, just a couple of drops or more, just to give it a bit of sheen. I don't like using too much turpentine. You can use less because it is dark. It gives a duller appearance than if you use too much oil. But there are some very good products on the market that you can buy ready-made for a mix to thin your oil paints. When I do the background, I sometimes mix on the canvas. As you can see, I try things out because I try and find things that go with the horse, really, or with the subject, to show her off to her best. And it depends on my mood. I just like to be a bit spontaneous about my background. As she's a horse, I sort of think of her as being out in the open and sniffing the fresh air and in a nice blue sky with a bit of grey maybe. I use surprisingly few colours. I mix them from the colours I've got. But sometimes I might add another blue, a slight blue, and then tone it down with maybe a little bit of the burnt umber so it's not too starey, and white. I mix my own black because I don't like it to be too black. So I use a mixture of burnt umber and French ultramarine, and that makes almost black, which is softer, I think, on a portrait. But if you prefer, you can use black. It's just a harder line. At this stage, I don't want to get too many hard lines, so I keep them fairly soft. I'm going into her face with the background, and then I can go over it again and re-establish her face. Because it's nice to have a little bit of a mix at the edge, because you don't want any hard lines at the edge because it makes the painting look very flat. When I start off doing the painting, I start with hog brushes, and when I'm doing the finer bits like the detail, I go on to using softer brushes. I never use acrylic, but I use squirrel hair or one of the other soft brushes you can get. When you're painting with hogs, after a certain stage, the hogs start to take the paint off rather than put it on. And that's why I changed to softer brushes. Sometimes I use sable for my soft brushes. And I blend all the time. You can blend with a dry brush. So you put your colour on, and it's just a case of working into the darks and the lights and making them blend so they don't make hard lines. Leave all the detail to the very end, really. So her eyes are gradually take time later to just fill them in a bit more. Although round her eyes is quite dark, she's got this creamy colour across the top and underneath. And her mane is really silvery. It's got quite a few colours in it, but the ends go very pale. She's got white hairs in from where it grows, and then and darker hairs as well, and then it just goes very pale towards the ends. And her tail the same. We're not doing her tail today. When you're painting horses, there's particularly pony type horses, even though she's a horse, she's got not many veins showing in her face. So I make sure I get in all the little details. Her cheekbones have a good shadow underneath them. And she's got a good shadow under her chin. A dishy little nose, so it sort of dents in, which is a little bit hidden on this picture because of her large mane. I'm going to put her bridle on to add a bit of interest to the painting. I do quite a lot of horses and dogs now, and I do a lot of landscapes. And living in the forest, I find there are quite a lot of wild ponies. But if you do a landscape and put ponies all in it, it then becomes about the ponies and not about the landscape. So not all my landscapes have ponies in. Your eye seems to be drawn to the living creatures. One's eye, I should say, not yours in particular. I've been painting for all my life. And I now just paint exactly what I want to paint, although I do commissions. And I enjoy doing them. I'm quite passionate about horses, having had them all my life. They've been part of my life. And brought up in the forest where every child seemed to have a pony when I was a child. The New Forest ponies are very hardy. And don't cost as much to keep Of course, there was a lot more land available in those days when I was young. I have unfortunately lost some of my camera footage as my batteries ran low, so occasionally it will jump from one scene to another, but you haven't missed much. It's only me fiddling around, really. I think the main bits are down that you need to know. And some bits would take too long and be a little bit boring to watch. If you get bored, you can always fast forward. I found it difficult to cut out too much because I liked to keep the bits where I was painting. I do fiddle around quite a bit with the background, changing it. Now, I've made her darker than she is. She's quite a bit paler, but what I like to do is let things dry a bit, so it's dry to the touch, and then I go back into it later after about 3 days or 4 days, and then put another layer on top. And that way I get the colour I'm happy with and the depth. Of course, putting the shadows in gives you your depth. It makes something that's flat look 3D. I really enjoy painting her because she's such an interesting colour. Her name's Fabby. So I lighten it once it gets too dark. I've only had this little horse for a year. I've got a little stallion that I would quite like to breed a little foal from them both, but I'm not 100% sure about that. It might take up rather a lot of time. He's even tinier, my stallion. I might paint him once I can get a decent... It's very difficult because his head's always in the wrong way or he's grazing all the time, so all I can get is a picture of him with his head down. He's darker than her. He sort of looks brown, but he's also a silver bay, so he does have paler colours. He looks more silver if he's clipped. I don't like clipping them in the winter. I think it's hard on them not to have their nice winter coat to keep them warm. Because they're not ridden, they're not rideable. These ponies, they're too little. also very friendly. I sometimes change the background quite a lot on paintings and then decide I don't like them and change them for something else. It's amazing how often I use my fingers just to blend. You can use another brush if you don't want to get your fingers dirty, but only just slightly touch the canvas. Painting's all about darks and lights as well as about form. When you get the darks dark enough, it makes the lighter colours ping out. A beginner's mistake is really not going dark enough with their darks. You clearly have got to put them in exactly the right place. I'm getting very close to the end now. After a while the painting gets a bit too wet to work. When the painting of the horse gets too wet to work on, that's when I go to the background and do that. I think we're more or less there anyway. So thank you for listening.